Hello, and a happy case of the Mondays from the Osceola.com as we bring you a Monday edition of Seminole Sidelines. My name is Nick Carlisle, staff writer for the Osceola.com, joined by head editor Bob Ferrante on a day where, I think a lot of us want to be excited about the Miami game that's coming up this upcoming Saturday. And it's not to say that we aren't, Bob. We're incredibly excited for the magnitude of what that game can be, not only for Florida State's season, but obviously all rivalry games are great and exciting. But if you're Florida State, you wanted to go into that game 4-0, but you're not going into that game 4-0. Florida State, of course, suffering a, 46-38. I think that's the final scoreline, Bob. Lost to Virginia Tech in not Virginia Tech. If they lost to Virginia Tech, that'd be incredibly awful.
NC State did. State did.
Well, and you know who lost to NC State? Virginia.
Yeah.
ACC is in shambles right now. Truly.
ACC chaos.
It is a wide open conference right now, but Florida State losing 48-36 to Virginia on Friday. We've had a little bit longer to digest this one, Bob, but it still does not subtract to the fact that this was probably a game that you felt like you should win. I think we did a good job acknowledging heading into that game, kind of the extra cheese that was being sprinkled on that Friday matchup. A, Friday night matchup on the road. B, 30-year anniversary of one of the, obviously awful for Florida State, but one of the best upsets that Virginia program has ever had against number 2 Florida State at the time. The throwback jerseys. And then it boiled down into the game that I think you and I, and to be fair, a lot of other outlets on this beat kind of said it boiled into that, what's going to happen when Florida State gets down multiple touchdowns on the road? That was the case scenario that I think everybody on this beat pointed to as saying, well, we don't know what that looks like yet. We've seen pockets of adversity for this team in moments, especially during Alabama, but we haven't seen that specific case scenario. We did see that specific case scenario last Friday, and Florida State did fight back. But at some point, it's a little bit too little too late in terms of instilling hope and confidence in a home team that had a raucous crowd at Scott Stadium. And, 30 years later, after that upset in 1995, Virginia finds themselves with another top 10 upset of Florida State, Bob.
It felt like, I know Mark Salva said post-game on our first impressions that Miami was on the brain of Florida State players. It also felt like Florida State didn't respect Virginia enough. It didn't feel like, it felt like you sized up the helmet and said, we got this. And that's not how, maybe that's how it was in the early 90s. I remember watching a lot of those games. I was a student here. Those are some blowouts. Those were some epic blowouts, man. I mean, seriously. But you can't, not in the way the transfer portal has reshaped a lot of teams, not the way Tony Elliott built this team, grabbing Chandler Morris, grabbing offensive linemen. And yes, Virginia was low on healthy offensive linemen. But it just didn't feel like Florida State gang tackled. It felt like they initially tried. That effort was there. But you go back and watch that film, there's a lot of kind of standing around watching, hey, I'm going to watch so-and-so make that play instead of I'm going to jump in and make sure that play is done and brought to the ground. So I think the positives here, Nick, are these things are A, correctable, but B, you're not going to have a lot of focus issues in Miami week because they respect the helmet. It's Florida State, Miami. I think a lot of those Virginia issues are learning lessons. It is a wake-up call, but this is Miami week. So I don't think there's focus type issues that Florida State's going to have moving forward here.
There may not be focus type issues, but I think something that is very concerning and worrisome about this matchup that's coming in this Saturday is the fact that, okay, you did have the focus issues. You had that emotional and intellectual adversity that you fought through that. You know, you were down 14 points, multiple turnovers. Gus's offense got you back in the game quickly. But I think what's concerning for me is what came after the fact. Once you kind of settled into that game and it became more about hat on hat and, you know, getting your matchups, Florida State failed to take control there. And that's when you saw more schematical mistakes happen. I can't remember. I can't recall how many times it was a simple read option call with Chandler Morrison, their running back, and whoever was on the outside. I don't know if it was the type of look that Tony was in. I don't know if it was a bear front. Like, I don't know if it was just the fact that there was a single guy on the outside. Somebody crashed in every single time. It happened 2 or 3 times, and Chandler Morris is up down the field for 15 yards, 20 yards. Defensively, I think that's where everybody is going to point their fingers and have pointed their fingers, and we'll get into what Tony White said yesterday a little bit. But you play Virginia, you play this game 10 times. I think if you say Gus is going to get you 31 points by the end of regulation or 35 points by the end of regulation, you feel like you're going to win that game 10 out of 10 times. That's just not what happened. Florida State was soft defensively on the defensive line. I think everybody is going to come for the throat of Darrell Jackson, and I don't think I think there's credit to or some blame to go around here, but I think Darrell Jackson was doing his job in the middle. You want to see him take more of a dominant advantage over what was a backup center. Obviously, Virginia's star center was out in this ball game. Maybe you wanted him to impose his will a little bit more, but he was soaking up the double teams like you would expect of him. The play from the rest of the defensive line was very concerning. And I think that when you have an offensive line as good as Miami's is coming in this next week, that's not the best look, Bob, judging from one game to the next.
I think it raises red flags, right? Because you expect Darrell Jackson's going to, like, he came back to be the consistent pro and not go into the NFL draft. He came back to show not just us, the NFL decision makers, that week in, week out, he was going to bring it. Now, how much of what Tony White said was coach speak? Because again, he said on Sunday night that, Darrell Jackson gave everything he could, worked his butt off to put Florida State in position to win that game. I don't think he's necessarily said it from start to finish that Darrell Jackson was that type of guy. Whereas he said Jabril Rawls was a guy who brought it, worked his butt off from start to finish. So did he maybe qualify a little bit in how Tony White was saying it? This is the nature of the job. I mean, you're going to be that big nose. You're going to be fighting double teams. I think he played 66 plays, which is also just incredible for a man that size, right? I mean, that's really, really hard. I know it's a night game. It wasn't super hot, humid, kind of 3:30 at Doak type of setting, but it's going to be tough for Darrell Jackson. But the other factor is, if Darrell Jackson's eating up these double teams, you have an expectation that James Williams, Deontay McCray, somebody coming off the edge as a linebacker, Juice Cryer, Stephon Thompson, is going to then have the opportunity to make the plays. So, like to your point, Nick, we didn't really see we saw a lot of pressures. I thought, honestly, the pressure total was pretty high from PFF. I think it was north of 20. But you only saw 2 sacks.
21 total pressures.
You only saw the 2 sacks from Barker, who is questionable this week. That's an interesting storyline, too. Per Mike Norvell, questionable.
Yeah.
So, again, where does that pressure come from? Against Miami, against this massive, massive front that's highly regarded. Are they the best offensive line in the conference? Are they among the best offensive lines, in the conference? I think they're up there. I think they're certainly up there, especially when you look at the point totals that they're allowing Carson Beck and this run game to accumulate.
Yeah, you mentioned Ashland Barker there a little bit, and obviously that's going to be a big loss for Florida State's defense if he isn't able to go for the Miami game. But curiously enough, his backup, or one of the backups, Shyheim Brown, never would have guessed this heading into the game, but he was the highest graded defender for Florida State's defense in 32 snaps with a 79.2. Good tackle grades, good run defense grades. I guess you got to feel a little bit encouraged that Shaheem, who has had a offseason where he just kind of got overtook by some of the younger guys in that safety room. He comes in, he's able to play, he's able to have a pretty good game, all things considered, in 32 total snaps. But keeping the conversation focused on the defensive line, if it felt like if you weren't named Deontay McCray, who graded at a 78.9, and granted, grades don't mean everything, but I think Deontay McCray flashed. Other than that, James Williams didn't flash. KJ Sampson didn't flash. He only played 12, 13 snaps, but he had he only graded at a 50. Jason Jenkins didn't flash. There was nobody really on that defensive line apart from Deontay McCray, and obviously the Desir twins are always going to give you your effort reps, but there was really nobody there that was able to step up and fill gaps and be able to stop that running game, which it's kind of confounding because that's Tony White's MO. That is this defense's MO, is to be able to plug up gaps, provide a bunch of different looks, and stop the run. What was it, 200 yards of rushing? Over 200 yards of rushing that Virginia was able to slack on the Noles there. And we may look back at this game 6-7 weeks from now and say, well, hey, this UVA offense is really just that damn good. But I'm sorry, you're playing against an injured offensive line and you cannot inflict your will. That, as you say, is a huge red flag. And I think what also is concerning, and something that I didn't like whatsoever, is the TV broadcast pans to the defensive line sitting on the bench in the fourth quarter, and defensive line coach Terrence Knighton is sitting there slumped over next to them. No juice, no nothing. Now, granted, that may have just been a down moment. Maybe he just got done tearing them or chewing them out. But the body language, not only from the players, but from the coaches, was horrible. Honestly, I kind of knew after seeing that they were going to lose that football game. And it was a miraculous throw from Tommy Castellanos to Randy Pittman in the final seconds to even get you to overtime. How concerned are you? So obviously you kind of talk about the look ahead to Miami. The flag is up around campus. You hope that there is going to be no lack of focus coming into this week, but is there any concern that some of that, I don't know, bad body language is going to carry over?
I'm going to go with no. I'm going to go with no simply because I think you've had a long weekend to review that film. I think you've gone through every play. I think the coaches have said there was physicality, there wasn't finish. I think that's a very interesting way of putting it into context. They felt like there was enough physicality. I might question that at certain times. Again, there wasn't the gang tackling. There wasn't the need to help as a defender. I'm going to go help Earl Little, or I'm going to go help somebody else. I mean, there are literally plays. You can go back and watch that replay. I don't want to name out specific guys, but it was evident there are just after a missed tackle, there was another guy nearby watching instead of jumping in to make sure a play is made. When Tony White says it could have been 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 8, and instead it became 3rd and 4, there were a lot of those plays where yes, I mean, Virginia's third down percentage was extremely high. It was like 7 of 13 at one point. It was like 7 of 10 early on.
Yeah.
But it was that way because they were so darn good at some of those yards after contact. On 1st and 2nd down, they were winning. After that initial hit, they were pushing forward. I said I wasn't going to name names, but it felt like it wasn't a good game for like an Earl Little. He really struggled.
It was actually statistically his worst if you want to go into the numbers.
Yes, like he made that initial contact, Nick. I mean, he really wanted it. I think he sought out contact a lot of times, but his ability to tackle, to wrap up, and also, again, it's not just on him. After somebody makes that contact, it is another defender's job to come in and make sure the play goes to the ground. So I'm not just putting it on him. I'm not just saying it was Edwin Joseph. I know people were critiquing Jabril Rawls during the game. I watched it and I watched him on a replay and I thought that was a really good Jabril Rawls game because I thought for a corner to try and tackle and run support, that was a positive. It's not all negative. I do think when the coaches say it's all correctable, it is, but it comes back down to you have to want that. You have to have seen it on film and take ownership of it and look at the guy next to you and almost apologize and say, that's not the best that I could have done. That's probably not the best you could have done. Let's make sure when we go out against Miami that we play a whole heck of a lot better.
Love Mike always coming in the chat with some positivity. He says, after all that happened in the game Friday, the Noles still had a chance to win that game. Is that something that you think is being lost on this performance? I know the tendency is to go straight down the negative trail and purely focus on the negative, especially with the expectations, the new expectations that this team had after the Alabama game. You think, okay, we're thinking ACC championship here, especially after 2 weeks of watching Florida crumble into a mess and Clemson especially crumble into a mess. You really thought, okay, Virginia, Miami, more so Miami was going to be that big test. And now after this Virginia loss, it feels like the expectations, to quote our old friend Patrick Burnham, we reevaluate and reassess on a week-to-week basis. Is the fact that the Noles were still in this game after a landslide of BS in terms of maybe turnovers that just don't bounce your way, some questionable calls, is it being lost that they were still in this game and they almost won this game despite all of that?
I think the coaches really want to say that this team rose up in the face of adversity multiple times, really. I mean, down 14-zip, they did. Late in the fourth quarter, had a drive, didn't make it happen, had a drive in the final minute, literally do make it happen. Like you said, that Castellanos pass on fourth down is incredible. That Randy Pittman catch is also remarkable too. That's a tight end. It's not a wide receiver, guys. I mean, Randy Pittman
also the third guy in Florida State history to have a throwing, a passing, and a running is he third, or I think is there 3 or 4?
3. And Jordan Travis did a couple of years ago against Syracuse. I remember that game. And a guy back in the late 40s did it too. So, I mean, we're talking modern era, not that many guys. Rare for a tight end too to do it. I think Florida State dug up that's the first time in 15 or so years that a tight end at the FBS level did what Randy Pittman did. I think when you have concerns about Florida State's focus, I guess I have fewer concerns moving forward. But I guess I feel like this is a team that needed this wake-up call. I think Tommy Castellanos in that post-game too really said he said they had been smelling themselves, almost like they had been smelling the perfume, to use the Bryant McFadden line, right? Sure. And I guess the only other thing I'd leave on as I'm kind of rambling here is the Danny Cannell line. I think he put this out on Twitter the other day. You know, we're in an era where you're going to see a lot of 1-loss and 2-loss teams in a 12-team playoff. We're in an era where you can't be expected to go unbeaten because of the quality of the scheduling. And that's more of a Big Ten and SEC discussion. But I think just because of the quality of the scheduling, because of the transfer portal era with so many players moving in and out, new coordinators, new assistant coaches. I mean, Gus beat this drum Sunday night, and he's done it pretty consistently. 11 new starters, all these new assistant coaches, 6 new assistant coaches. You might have to expect there's going to be some trip ups, and we're going to call them trap games, but they're going to be trip ups. And I think at the end of the year, we'll see just a bunch of 1-loss and 2-loss teams in a 12-team playoff.
So with that being said, we know that this Miami game was crucial. It was going to be a crucial game no matter what you drew up or how the cards laid out. I said this to you after the game on Friday, I think, but I said, if you're Florida State, you were hoping to go into this Miami game 3-1. You are going into this Miami game 3-1. You just beat the team that you thought you were going to lose to, and you lost to the team that you were pretty confident that you were going to beat. Is that the correct mentality that you want to have? Obviously, if you're Florida State, you want to go into this game completely undefeated, saying we've handled every challenge ahead of us. Is that kind of mentality shift something that maybe you can play to, saying, hey, look, understanding the challenges that went into this year, the lack of spring ball that we had, the injury problems that we had throughout the spring and summer, is that how you refocus your guys, saying, hey, look, we're still in a good spot here, we just got to go out and do our job? Is that something that you feel like you can lean into? And how much more important does this Miami game become, knowing that 2 ACC losses, that's kind of the kicker too. It's like Alabama's obviously not going to be a conference loss. Virginia is. You can't really afford to lose another conference game, especially with the schedule that Georgia Tech has. And you would assume if Miami beats Florida State this weekend that they're probably, unless crystal ball crumbles, which obviously is shown to do, that you're probably out of the conference championship race too. So I kind of threw a bunch of questions at you there. It's Monday here. The ADHD is going strong. But I'll let you divulge on that.
Something you said that I hadn't really thought of is if you do divide the season in 2 months, in 2 quarters, so to speak. I think Florida State passed the first quarter test at 3-1. And would you take the Alabama win if you're going back to the preseason and somebody said you can have an Alabama win or a stunning Virginia loss? How many fans are going to say, I want that Alabama win? That's a resume win, like, period. I think Florida State fans would take that. But then to your next question is the Virginia loss coupled with a potential of losing to Miami, right? That's not going to sit well, because then as you look as a player or as a fan, does Florida State prove itself against Pittsburgh, against Stanford, against Wake Forest, before Clemson? There aren't that many prove yourself opportunities after Miami. This is a really important game, I think, for just all the obvious reasons. It's pride. It's pride in yourself as a player. It's pride in the program. It's recruiting pride. It's what the fans want. I mean, this is, especially after last year's game, you need to bounce back, I think, big against a rival. But then you do look at the potential of what Florida State can do this month. If they can, it would be an upset technically, right? Florida State's a 7-ish point underdog.
I think they're just under a touchdown dog.
And that would not be a massive upset, but it would be a considerable win in a rivalry series at home if Florida State can. They've shown they can run the ball, right? I mean, in 2 significant Power 4 games, they have shown they can run the ball. Now, the big question is, can you do it against Miami and Ruben Bain and everything that they've got? So I think, again, it's not fall behind. We talked about earlier that Tommy Castellano showed he can help you rally and he can make some big throws late. I also don't think you want to be in that position again. I don't think you want to lean on Tommy's right arm. I think you want to lean on the run game and not making mistakes and pushing that ball down the field so that you're in a tight game late, that you're not down 14 at any point. Like, that's just not the formula for success, the way this offense is built, to me.
And Tommy, I don't think Tommy was 100%. I think that definitely played a factor in everything as well. I think if you're looking at Tommy Castellanos' performance, I think you're encouraged by what you saw. He was able to reference something like a little bit. I think it was the first or second scrimmage that they played where Mike mentioned that Tommy threw a pick and he kind of bounced right back and threw a touchdown drive or had a touchdown drive right after that. Do you remember that? That's the kind of thing that I think we saw on display at Virginia. He was able to have some of those turnovers, both of them. Well, obviously the Sawchuk fumble, not his fault. The interception, that's just a good play, in my opinion. It sucks. It's in the red zone. You got to own it. You got to wear it. Still was able to be productive on offense there. I really am not worried about moving forward. I'm not worried about Castellanos. I'm a little bit worried about the turnovers on the offense in general. I hope that's just a one-game thing, but I'm not worried about Tommy and his fight and his ability to lead this offense and get them back on the same page. Gus is going to get you 30 points. At least that's the standard right now. Right. My concern completely lies with the defense. And if we want to kind of weigh the positives and the negatives here, take a look at what Miami does. Miami does not have a mobile quarterback whatsoever. Beck can run when he needs to, but that's not who he is by default. So you feel a little bit better about being able to play the pass a little bit more efficiently, but you're still going to have to stop the run. And Florida State really couldn't do that against an injured offensive line. And that's what's really scary for me. The play of the linebackers was not great. I think, curiously enough, I wonder if there was something wrong with Omar Graham because he only played like 8 or 9 snaps. and he had been playing pretty well up until that point. The linebacker play was not great. The defensive line we touched on earlier in the show. The end play specifically, James Williams got singled out, well-deserved. He did not have a good game. I am worried. Like the positivity is that, well, Carson Beck is not going to torch you with your legs. And my response to that is, well, he's not going to have to, especially if they can run the ball efficiently. Those two drives in the back half of the Virginia game, Bob, the 15, I don't know exactly how many. I think it was 15 and 12 plays where they did nothing but run the football down Florida State's throat against a defense in which the calling card was stopping the run. That is what concerns me the most.
Agree. And it's not just Carson Beck. We're going to focus on Carson Beck. I think it's that run pass balance that Miami possesses, this improved receiving core that Miami has too, blended with that big offensive line. I think you don't want to get into a shootout in this game. The more and more I kind of think about this game, I fear the shootout because the potential that Miami, like you said, can use the run game, can use Carson Beck's efficiency, can keep Carson pretty clean, right? I think there's a lot of fears about just what Miami can do as far as putting up points on the board. At the same time, I still think Gus and the offense is going to be clicking. I think Florida State can run the ball. Mm-hmm. Do you want a shootout, though? Do you really want this game to go north of 30 points and just see what's going to happen late? Because you could have a turnover, a penalty, something crazy that just the game turns on one weird, wild thing late in the fourth quarter. And I'm not talking about a kick. I'm not going down that road in the fourth Miami series yet. I'm talking about offense or defense.
How much stock do you put into the fact that this is going to be Miami's first road game of the season? Do you think that that's going to be a factor here? My heart says yes. As an alumni of this university, as somebody that's been to countless games in my time, and we have seen the effect that Doak had earlier this season, my heart wants to say the road is going to be a factor. This crowd is going to be a factor. Miami being on the road for the first time and having to navigate that is going to be a factor, but my brain is telling me I don't know how much of a factor it's actually going to be, considering who they have at the helm at quarterback and how experienced this Miami team is overall across all aspects, defense and offense. How much of a factor do you think that it's going to be on Saturday?
Yeah, I think you hit on some good points there. I think for Carson Beck in particular, he's been in just as crazy of an atmosphere.
SEC environments too.
SEC environments, right? Yeah. So I think the question you have is it similar to what Florida State just faced at Virginia, where it was their first road game? I heard Tom Block and Keith Jones mention like the team was not staying in Charlottesville. So they were in Richmond, they had to bus in. There was a little bit of a different type of, daily day of type preparation. It's not going to be that way for Miami here when they come to Tallahassee, but it's the first time you are working as 11 guys on the field against 11 on defense plus 66,000 providing crowd noise. I think that first quarter could be a little bit shaky for Miami, just as far as understanding the communication, watching when the clock, runs down, watching the play clock runs down. How are their hand signals? How much are they implementing crowd noise and trying to prepare for this situation? I think it could provide for them some sluggishness in the first quarter, could provide Florida State some opportunities to get a 3 and out, could get an early turnover that maybe you turn into good field position. So I would look at it as a good opportunity for Florida State if that's the way it plays out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't necessarily think of it from that way because, if you want to talk about electric offense, Gus has been able to script pretty well. And, there would have been points on the board if that Deuce Robinson pass interference call didn't come through. They were going down the field effectively. It's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be complicated in the way that all rivalry games are complicated, Bob, where everything that talking heads like you and I can say can very well matter heading into the game. As soon as you spot the ball and go into it, all hell can break loose and it can go in any one direction. I kind of asked you beforehand, I'm gonna rephrase it a different way. Do you consider this a game a must-win for Florida State?
Let's look at it from the way of you want to make the playoff and you want to challenge for the ACC to be in Charlotte. Then in that regard, it is, yes. Now, can Florida State still have a very successful season with a loss? I see a schedule where you can stack some wins. Again,
Sure.
Pittsburgh, Stanford, Wake Forest. We'll see if Clemson can regroup, right? I'm not ever going to say Clemson on the road is going to be a pushover. And NC State on a Friday, right? Florida in the Swamp. This isn't a soft schedule, but there are opportunities there for you to stack wins. Nick, I would say at the quarter mark, let me say it this way. If we would have said Florida State's 3-1, has a shot at 9 wins, maybe even more. I mean, I think a lot of Florida State fans would take it. I mean, this feels like you are building toward a successful season. But yes, if you are the Mike Myricks of the world, you are super optimistic, and you're thinking, how do we get this Florida State team into a 12-team playoff? Which, again, felt like in the offseason was a long shot, guys, right? I mean, we all kind of had to admit that was a long shot. And then you kind of build up a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of confidence, just as the team did. I never really bought into this team as a playoff team, but I can certainly buy now that Florida State can win 8 or 9 and maybe go win that bowl game and have a really great year that potentially springboards you into 26. So go back to your question, is it a must win? I can argue it either way. I can definitely see why you want it to be a must win. I think for the recruiting advantages, for keeping players focused down the stretch through the season, there's so many reasons why, yes, you want it to be a must win for sure.
Going to touch on some of the injury stuff really quick before we wrap up the show. Obviously, we mentioned it earlier. Ashlyn Barker is questionable this week. Maybe it's more serious than the coaching staff wants to be led on. At least that's kind of some of the quiet chatter that's going around right now. Roydell Williams back on the depth chart this week. I don't think we're going to see him this week. I think that he's coming along slowly. Not that it really matters all that much, because I think that we have seen with the production of Gavin Sawchuk and Usman Kroma, who are both kind of those hard, tough yard runners, that maybe Florida State doesn't need Roydell in the sense of his production, maybe so in terms of his jersey and being able to take a couple of carries, a couple of hard-nosed carries. But then again, we've seen Keziah Holmes be effective too. So interesting to see where Roydell kind of slits back into the rotation if he does come back this week. If not this week, then maybe building more towards next week when you get Pitt at home, or maybe West Coast games against Stanford in 2 weeks. Kevin Wynn kind of creeping closer and closer to being able and being ready to go. That would be big for Florida State. Maybe take a little bit more of the stress off of Darrell Jackson. There hasn't really been a nose tackle, Bob, apart from D-Jack, that's really been able to consistently go out there and deliver results. Daniel Lyons has had his moments, not so much in that Virginia game. KJ Sampson has had some okay moments, definitely not in that Virginia game. I think he was the lowest graded defensive player in 12 snaps against Virginia. So there's some work to be done there. I'm excited for Kevin and the player that he can be if he's able to get in there. Is there anything else that we have missed here, Bob, in terms of injuries or storylines as we officially now turn the page towards Miami?
I think on the Roydell front, there's been a lot of criticism over who he is as a player. How much does he bring? How much does he take away in terms of carries from Usman Kroma, for example, right? Mm-hmm. I think you have to ask yourself to some extent, who's the best pass blocker among the running backs? I think that's an interesting discussion, especially with this Miami defensive front. We probably think Gavin Sawchuk is the best pass protector among the backs. I mean, I think that's a pretty well agreed upon stance, right?
Yeah.
I would argue maybe Kroma missed the block on that Tommy Castellanos interception, down near the goal line, where you had Squirrel kind of running in motion. Should Usman have gone and kind of chipped out that corner to buy Tommy some time? I've suggested that as a theory without knowing exactly what the responsibilities are on that play. So I'll ask it this way. If Roydell's back, do you use Roydell in certain situations more as a blocker, more to protect Tommy, to make sure that plays are functional? That's an interesting discussion that I think we might want to unpack as the week goes on. The other thing I can also argue is I can't believe we're at this point and we're saying that Ashwin Barker is a pretty essential part
Yeah.
of the discussion, that if you don't have him for this game, you start to worry about the secondary. Is that in part because of Earl Little struggling? Does Earl Little dial back in because he's a South Florida guy and this is a big game? And, you worry less about Earl now after he's had that bad game and he's gotten that out of his system. So I think there's some interesting injury, but then who's the next man up within the discussion type storylines. So it'll be very curious to see when the injury report comes out Wednesday night. What is said there? Are they both questionable or not? It's a very interesting, I think, availability discussion for sure.
Yeah, just something very quickly to note before we sign off here about that safety situation. I think you're probably okay with it as long as Shaheem Brown continues to deliver in the way that he was. I mean, he had a good game in the snaps that he had. We talked about it earlier in the show. KJ Kirkland, only 5 snaps this past week at Virginia. Perhaps a reflection of the play against Kent State, where it was very clearly a busted coverage on his doing. Edwin Joseph playing 83 snaps as well. Kind of in that safety position there. He had a pretty bad tackling grade, if I remember correctly, but and obviously he had the interception. I don't remember him having a bad game otherwise. So, maybe as much as we want to sit here and praise Ashton Barker, and he has had a great season, he will be a loss to this team if he can't play. I think now getting into these games, you could see where some of that slack is going to get picked up, especially if somebody like Shaheem is back to being that kind of veteran guy that you can rely on, which obviously that his reputation for being that was completely sucked out the window with the way that he played last year. So it's going to be interesting to see where Florida State goes from there and all the little tidbits. It's so great, by the way, that we get those injury reports now. It's really nice. It's really nice. So with all eyes pointing towards that injury report coming in the next 48 hours, 62 hours, something like that.
Wednesday night. Yep.
Wednesday night. So we'll get there eventually. The Front Row Knowles crew is going to be back on Wednesday as always. So that will be posted Wednesday, 3:00, the normal time. Bob, Tom, and Keith are going to dive in a little bit more about what this Miami matchup is going to mean for Florida State, what they're going to need to do to be able to pull off what would be technically an upset if you're Vegas. Just under a touchdown underdog currently is where the line sits. But as for today, thank you all so much for watching. Make sure that you like the video, subscribe, and all that jazz. Head over to theosceola.com. 31% off for an annual subscription and a $25 gift credit on theosceola.com's branded merchandise store. And is the antique store up as well, Bob? The collection store, or is that coming soon?
I know they're pretty close. I mean, Jerry's been working on that. So it's a memorabilia store. So it's a lot of autographed jerseys. It's even some like ACC championship rings. I mean, there's some truly unique type things. I think within the next few days or a week, that's going to be up.
So be on the lookout for that. Thanks you so much for watching today. My name is Nick Carlisle, staff writer and recruiting writer for theosceola.com. And that is Bob Ferrante, the head editor of theosceola.com. Front Row Knowles and Bob Ferrante will be back on your television, laptop, phone screens, whatever screen you're watching on Wednesday. See you then.